The air in the penthouse apartment was thick, cloying with the metallic tang of stale blood and the sterile bite of cleaning agents. It was a familiar cocktail, one that usually signaled a predictable end. I moved through the opulent living space, my boots muffled by the plush Persian rug, the silence broken only by the low murmur of the crime scene technicians and the occasional click of a camera shutter. "Routine, Dean," the lead detective had said earlier, his voice already weary from a long night. "Looks like another tech mogul who pushed too hard and fell too far. Opioids, probably fentanyl. The usual." I nodded, not in agreement, but acknowledgement. The detective had his theories, and they were often right. But my job wasn't about theories. It was about facts, about the microscopic narratives hidden beneath the surface. My name is Dean, and I dig for those stories. The victim lay slumped on a pristine white leather sofa, a picture of modern despair. He was a reclusive tech entrepreneur, known more for his algorithms than his social graces. His skin, a pasty gray, contrasted sharply with the vibrant throw pillows scattered around him. A small, empty baggie, the kind often associated with narcotics, lay discarded on the glass coffee table, alongside a half-empty tumbler. The scene screamed overdose. Everything was neatly aligned, almost too perfect in its disarray. I knelt, my gloved hands hovering over the body, my eyes scanning every inch. The technicians were already bagging evidence, documenting the obvious. I focused on the less obvious. The way a single strand of dark hair lay across the victim's cheek, almost like it had been placed there. The subtle, almost imperceptible discoloration on the inside of his left forearm. A faint, mottled purplish hue that didn't quite fit the general pallor. It was too localized, too distinct. "Anything jumping out at you, Dean?" A colleague, the lead forensic technician, asked, his voice low. "Just getting acquainted," I replied, my gaze fixed on the victim's hands. His fingers were slightly splayed, palms up, a posture of surrender. Not dirt, not blood, something else. I leaned closer, my breath held. The smudge was almost iridescent, a microscopic rainbow of oils. It was the kind of residue left by handling something metallic, something old and frequently touched. It didn't fit the narrative of a quick, desperate overdose. Addicts weren't usually polishing antique brass in their final moments. My eyes moved from his hand to the nearby surfaces. The coffee table, gleaming glass, held no corresponding mark. The sofa arm, smooth leather, nothing. My gaze drifted to the floor beneath the edge of the sofa, where the plush rug met the polished hardwood. There, tucked almost perfectly into the seam, I saw it. A small, tarnished brass key. It was intricately designed, with a unique, almost Gothic cut to its teeth. Not a modern key, not for an apartment or a car. This was for something older, something more substantial. Its surface, despite the grime, bore a faint, almost invisible etching. A series of interlocking geometric shapes, almost like a stylized crest. And next to it, so small I nearly missed it, a string of numbers. Not a serial number, but something that resembled an address. I retrieved it with tweezers, dropping it into an evidence bag. The numbers, barely legible, began to form a pattern in my mind. Not an apartment number, not a safe deposit box number I recognized from any local bank. This was an actual street address, one I knew was home to the city's oldest, most forgotten structures. "Found something, Dean?" The detective's voice cut through my thoughts. He stood over me, his face etched with impatience. "Perhaps," I said, holding up the bagged key. "This doesn't quite fit the picture of a man spiraling into addiction." The detective peered at it, then shrugged. "Maybe he was trying to open a liquor cabinet before he went down. Or it's just junk. People keep all sorts of nonsense." I didn't argue. He saw a dead man and an open and shut case. I saw a story begging to be told, a narrative that didn't quite align with the prologue. The faint, mottled discoloration on the victim's arm, the iridescent smudge on his finger. And now this archaic key with its cryptic address. My intuition, a low thrumming beneath my ribs, told me this wasn't just junk. I looked at the etched numbers again. They pointed directly to the abandoned Branch Bank old safety deposit room on Elm Street, a derelict building that had been slated for demolition for years. Why would a tech entrepreneur living in a penthouse have a key to a forgotten place like that? And why, in his final moments, would he have handled it? The obvious explanation, the routine overdose, suddenly felt like a carefully constructed facade. The tension in the room, previously unnoticed, now felt palpable, pressing down on me. This wasn't just a tragic accident. My gut told me it was something far more deliberate, far more intricate. That place, a mausoleum of forgotten transactions, still clung to the edges of my thoughts. The faint mottled discoloration on the victim's arm, the iridescent smudge on his finger, and that archaic key with its cryptic address. My intuition had screamed that something was wrong, a silent alarm no one else seemed to hear. Now, under the relentless fluorescent glare of the main processing facility, the victim lay on a stainless steel examination table. His skin, a muted gray, was already losing the last vestiges of human warmth. The lead investigator, a burly figure with perpetually tired eyes, gestured vaguely at the body. Looks like a classic. Unfortunate, but clear. He meant an overdose. The initial field assessment, rushed and superficial, had already painted the narrative. I didn't argue. Not yet. My colleague, a meticulous technician named Sarah, was already meticulously cataloging the victim's clothing, each item carefully placed in its own evidence bag. I watched her for a moment, then moved to the adjacent workstation, where a powerful stereo microscope waited. My focus wasn't on the obvious, but on the infinitesimal. Anything unusual on the primary garments, Dean? The lead investigator asked, his voice already moving on, mentally filing this case away. Not yet, I replied, my gaze fixed on a section of the victim's wool jacket, now spread flat beneath the microscope's lens. The fabric was a tapestry of fibers, dust motes, and the usual urban detritus. Most of it was unremarkable. Common textile fibers, bits of skin, specks of road grit. But then, there it was. A cluster of minute, golden-brown grains, barely visible to the naked eye, clinging stubbornly to a crease near the lapel. I adjusted the focus, bringing the anomaly into sharp relief. Each grain was a perfect, intricate sphere, studded with delicate, spiky protrusions, like a miniature alien burr. It wasn't any pollen I recognized from the city's usual flora. I leaned closer, my breath held. The shape, the texture, the precise arrangement of its surface. This was distinct. My mind raced through botanical classifications, a mental Rolodex of thousands of species. See something? Sarah asked, her voice quiet, sensing my absorption. She knew my habits, the way I could get lost in the microscopic world. I didn't answer immediately. I reached for a pair of sterile tweezers, my movements precise, extracting a few of the grains and transferring them to a clean slide. I then moved to the more powerful compound microscope, increasing the magnification exponentially. The spiky surface became even more pronounced, the color a richer, deeper amber. This, I murmured, more to myself than to Sarah, is Cypripedium calceolus pollen. Sarah paused, her pen hovering over a log sheet. The lady's slipper orchid? That's rare and protected. You'd find that in very specific undisturbed temperate forests. Not exactly a city park flower. The lead investigator, who had been reviewing some paperwork, looked up, a frown creasing his brow. Orchids? What are you talking about, Dean? He was found in an abandoned bank vault, not a botanical garden. Exactly, I said, my voice low but firm. This particular species is extremely particular about its habitat. It needs specific soil, specific fungal associations. It doesn't just grow anywhere. And it certainly doesn't grow in an urban environment, let alone the kind of derelict space we pulled him from. I looked up, meeting the lead investigator's gaze. This pollen shouldn't be here. It's completely inconsistent with the known movements of someone living in this city or with the scene itself. He scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. Could have brushed against it somewhere. Could be old. Could be anything. It's fresh, I countered, pointing to the slide. The integrity of the X-sign, the outer layer, is almost perfect. It hasn't degraded significantly. This isn't something from weeks ago. This is recent. My gaze returned to the microscopic world on the slide. The tiny, spiky grains, a silent, insistent contradiction to the easy answers. The official narrative of an accidental overdose was already fraying at the edges, picked apart by something invisible, something utterly out of place. The tension in the room, though unspoken, was palpable. My determination solidified, a cold, hard knot in my gut. This wasn't an accident. And this rare, beautiful pollen was the first thread. The spiky grains on the slide pulsed under the microscope's intense light, their intricate patterns screaming for deeper scrutiny. Recent, I muttered again, the word hanging in the quiet hum of the lab. This wasn't some ambient dust. This was a direct, fresh transfer. My fingers, still stained faintly with reagents from the earlier toxicology screen, moved to adjust the focus, sharpening the image until the Xen layer seemed to almost vibrate with detail. I called over a colleague, a junior investigator still navigating the labyrinthine protocols of forensic botany. Get this prepped for high-resolution mass spectrometry. I want a full chemical profile. Pinpoint every organic compound, every trace element. I need to know where this specific type of pollen grows. The colleague nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes as he recognized the shift in my focus. The initial toxicology report had been a dead end, a textbook overdose. But this pollen, this tiny, insistent detail, was pulling at a loose thread in the fabric of the official narrative. Hours later, the mass spectrometry results scrolled across my monitor, a dense forest of peaks and valleys. I cross-referenced them with global botanical databases, filtering for unique chemical signatures and rare species. The system whirred, processing terabytes of data until a single match glowed on the screen. Florus ignis, a genetically modified crop. My brow furrowed. Florus ignis wasn't a natural plant. It was an experimental strain, developed by the agricultural giant Agrigen Corp., and cultivated exclusively within their highly restricted research facility. A sprawling complex nestled deep in the arid plains, hundreds of miles from the city. The coordinates flashed, stark and undeniable. A chill snaked up my spine. How did pollen from a secure, experimental facility end up on the clothes of a victim found in an anonymous apartment? This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate, impossible contradiction. My thoughts raced. If the pollen was a clue, what else had been overlooked? I turned my attention to the victim's digital life, a realm I usually preferred to leave to the dedicated digital forensics specialist. But something about this felt urgent, personal. I pulled up the victim's recovered laptop image, a digital ghost of their last moments. The specialist had already extracted the standard data: emails, browsing history, social media. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the mundane digital footprint of a young urbanite. But I wasn't looking for the ordinary. I was looking for the hidden, the encrypted, the deleted. I started sifting through the metadata, examining file creation dates, access logs, looking for anomalies. It was a tedious, mind-numbing process, like searching for a single grain of sand on an endless beach. Then I found it. The specialist had flagged them, but without a key, they were just digital noise. I spent the next few hours working through decryption protocols, a complex dance of algorithms and brute force. The tension in the air was palpable, the only sound the rhythmic tap of my fingers on the keyboard and the whir of the cooling fans. Finally, a cascade of plain text files and images burst onto the screen. My eyes widened. These weren't personal files. These were research notes, internal memos, and aerial photographs, all detailing Agrigen Corp's experimental agricultural facility. The victim hadn't just stumbled upon the pollen. They had been actively investigating Agrigen. The documents spoke of environmental impact reports being suppressed, of proprietary genetic material being tested in ways that skirted ethical guidelines, and, most disturbingly, of a specific, highly volatile chemical compound being used as a pesticide on the Florus ignis crops, a compound that, when combined with certain common recreational substances, could mimic the exact symptoms of the victim's overdose. My gaze fell on a cryptic message, a fragmented conversation log. It mentioned a drop point, a place to secure information. The last entry was a set of coordinates, followed by a single repeated phrase, "Old Vault." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a long shot, but the victim had clearly been desperate to hide something. I drove through the city's thinning evening traffic, the setting sun casting long, skeletal shadows of forgotten industrial complexes. A heavy, rusted iron gate creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the stillness. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating peeling paint and scattered debris. I moved cautiously, my hand resting on the holstered sidearm I rarely needed in the lab. The main lobby was a cavernous space, its once grand marble counters now chipped and stained. I followed the faint outline of old floor plans I'd quickly pulled up on my tablet, navigating through a maze of empty offices until I reached the back. Rows of empty safety deposit boxes lined the walls, a silent testament to forgotten fortunes. Most were open, their contents long since claimed or abandoned. But one, tucked away in a corner, was different. Its latch was subtly bent, not broken, as if it had been forced open and then hastily resecured. A faint, almost imperceptible residue clung to the edges of the tiny door. I pulled out my evidence kit, carefully swabbing the surface. This was it. This was where the victim had hidden something, and someone else had already been here. The realization sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through me. I wasn't just investigating a murder. I was racing against whoever had committed it. The coordinates glowed on my tablet, a stark digital beacon against the encroaching twilight. Overgrown ivy had claimed most of the brick facade, its tendrils snaking into every cracked window, giving the structure the appearance of a ruin slowly being swallowed by the earth. A chill, unrelated to the evening air, traced its way down my spine. This was it, the long shot. I parked my vehicle a block away, tucked behind a derelict warehouse, its corrugated metal siding rusted to a deep mottled orange. The silence of the street was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the pavement. I grabbed my investigative kit, the familiar weight a small comfort against the gnawing unease. The front door of the old bank hung ajar, a gaping maw of splintered wood and broken glass. Dust motes danced in the sliver of fading light that pierced the gloom within. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, decaying paper, and the metallic tang of rust. My boots crunched on shattered plaster and debris as I navigated the lobby, past overturned teller stations and a collapsed ceiling section. I moved with a practiced caution, my senses heightened, listening for anything that didn't belong. The main vault, a behemoth of steel and reinforced concrete, dominated the rear of the bank. Its massive circular door, once a symbol of impenetrable security, stood slightly ajar, testament to time, or perhaps to a more recent intrusion. The space inside was surprisingly intact, a stark contrast to the decay outside. Rows of empty safety deposit boxes, their brass fronts tarnished and dull, lined the walls like skeletal teeth. My gaze swept over the silent boxes, each one a testament to forgotten secrets, to lives once lived. A memory surfaced then, sharp and intrusive, pulling me back to the sterile confines of the analytical lab just days before. The initial toxicology report was clean, Dean. Fentanyl, oxycodone, a mix, but nothing that screams foul play. The chief analyst, a veteran with tired eyes, had stated, pushing a printout across the stainless steel table. I had tapped a finger on the victim's file. And the levels? Are we talking recreational or self-destructive? Recreational, certainly. High, but not immediately lethal for someone with a tolerance, which the victim clearly had. It looks like a classic accidental overdose. But it hadn't felt accidental. There was a precision to the scene, a calculated disarray that had grated against my instincts. The way the pill bottles were scattered, just so. The empty glass of water beside the bed, a perfect prop. It was too neat, too textbook. Run it again, I'd insisted. Deeper. Look for anything out of place. Anything that doesn't fit the standard profile. The analyst had sighed, but his respect for my methods usually superseded his weariness. He'd known my tenacity. 2 days later, the follow-up report landed on my desk. The preliminary findings were still there, the opioid cocktail confirmed. But below that, a new section, flagged with a red asterisk. The victim had ingested the specified opioids, but the quantity was meticulously controlled. Just enough to induce a profound stupor, to mimic the symptoms of an overdose, but not enough to kill. The actual cause of death, hidden beneath the veil of the manufactured scene, was a secondary agent, a neurotoxin. A potent, fast-acting compound designed to disrupt the victim's autonomic nervous system, shutting down vital functions with brutal efficiency. It was designed to degrade rapidly, leaving almost no trace, undetectable by routine screens. A ghost in the machine. The meticulousness, the sheer audacity of it, was breathtaking. They hadn't just killed. They had engineered a death, a fabricated illusion so perfect it had fooled everyone, almost. The initial drugs were merely a smokescreen, a red herring laid out for a cursory glance, ensuring the real killer remained invisible. And now, standing here, in this silent vault, the implications crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't the work of an amateur. The kind of precision that spoke of resources, of connections, of power. This wasn't just a murder. It was a message, a warning, delivered with surgical exactitude. My gaze fell upon a small, dislodged panel on the wall, behind where one of the safety deposit box columns should have been. It wasn't a natural break. My fingers brushed against the rough concrete, then slid into the gap. A small, intricately carved silver key, unlike any I'd ever seen, its teeth complex and unique. It was too deliberately placed, too out of context to be random. I wasn't just looking for clues anymore. The red asterisk on the follow-up report felt like a brand, searing itself onto the page. Below the confirmed opioid cocktail, a new section, starkly titled Anomalous Toxin Markers, detailed the presence of a synthetic peptide. Not a known poison in itself, but a potent, rapid-acting potentiator. It amplified the effects of the opioids by a factor of 10, ensuring immediate, irreversible respiratory depression. It was designed to mimic an overdose, but with an unnerving surgical precision. My jaw tightened. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't even a simple murder. This was an execution, meticulously engineered to leave no trace for anyone but the most tenacious observer. The analyst had delivered, as always. His meticulous work had peeled back the first layer of a very sophisticated lie. I picked up the secure line, the cool plastic of the receiver a small comfort against the heat building in my chest. It's Dean, about the follow-up report, the peptide. Ah, yes. The analyst's voice came through, a faint weariness still present but now tinged with a professional curiosity. A fascinating compound, very rare. No known clinical applications. Seems custom synthesized. Our best guess is it was introduced concurrently with the opioid dose, accelerating the metabolic process to fatal levels before the body could even begin to process the narcotics normally. Makes it look like a sudden, overwhelming reaction to the drugs themselves. So, the victim didn't just overdose, I stated, the words tasting like ash. He was made to overdose, with absolute certainty. Precisely. Someone wanted to ensure the outcome, and quickly, while simultaneously creating the perfect alibi for a drug-related fatality. The analyst paused. "You were right, Dean. There was more." I hung up, the implications settling like a lead weight. This meant the victim had been targeted, not just by chance, but with a specific, deadly intent. My focus shifted from the mechanics of death to the motive. Who would go to such elaborate lengths? And why? The next morning, I gathered my core team. The forensic technician, a man whose hands were as precise with microtools as a surgeon's, sat across from me. Beside him, the digital analyst, a woman whose fingers danced across keyboards, extracting secrets from encrypted layers, and the lead investigator, whose sharp eyes had seen more shadows than sunlight in his career. The heavy vault door, though long since emptied of its treasures, still offered a sense of impenetrable security, the thick concrete walls muffling any stray sound, blocking any remote surveillance. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of dust and forgotten paper. The victim's death was orchestrated, I began, my voice low, cutting through the quiet hum of their laptops. A sophisticated murder designed to look like an overdose. A synthetic peptide was used to accelerate the opioid's effect. The lead investigator leaned forward, his expression grim. Not just a street hit, then. This points to professionals. High level. Exactly, I affirmed. Which means we need to reevaluate everything. Forget the drugs for a moment. What was the victim involved in? What was he working on, professionally or personally, that could warrant this kind of attention? The digital analyst, her spectacles glinting in the harsh overhead light, tapped a few keys. We've been digging deeper into his digital footprint. Beyond the surface-level emails and social media, there are layers. Encrypted drives, secure messaging apps he used sporadically. He was careful, almost paranoid. Paranoia or precaution? I mused, a flicker of understanding beginning to ignite. What did he have to hide, or to protect? He was compiling data, the digital analyst reported, her voice picking up speed. A vast amount of it. Financial records, internal memos from a corporation, scientific papers, all pointing to an experimental facility on the outskirts of the city. Officially, it's listed as an agricultural research center, focused on crop yield enhancement and disease resistance. My gut clenched. Agricultural research. Go on. He was trying to connect the dots, she continued, pulling up a series of complex flowcharts and redacted documents on a large monitor we'd brought in. His notes, embedded within the encrypted files, suggest he believed the agricultural research was a cover. He suspected they were developing something far more insidious, something that could be weaponized. The lead investigator swore under his breath. A bioweapon? That's what his research indicated, the digital analyst confirmed, her gaze meeting mine. He had evidence, fragmented but compelling, that the experimental facility was secretly developing a highly virulent pathogen, disguised as a new strain of pesticide-resistant grain. A bioweapon masquerading as agricultural research. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and chilling. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The elaborate murder, the precision of the peptide, the meticulous cover-up. It wasn't just about silencing a witness. It was about burying a truth that could shatter global stability. He was on the verge of exposing them, I stated, the words leaving my lips like an accusation. His death wasn't just murder. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything I'd ever encountered. This wasn't a local crime. This was a conspiracy reaching into the highest echelons of power, with implications for millions. I looked at my team, their faces etched with the same grim realization as mine. They knew he was close. They moved to stop him. Now we're picking up where he left off, and that makes us targets. My gaze swept over them, resolute. Are we in? My findings, gentlemen, I stated, tapping the laser pointer against the projected image of the cellular degradation report, are conclusive. The toxicology report, initially dismissed as an overdose, was deliberately manipulated. The specific enzymatic markers I've identified indicate a forced metabolic acceleration, mimicking the effects of a catastrophic organ failure. This wasn't an accident. The senior investigator, a man with tired eyes and a perpetually tight collar, nodded slowly. The board has reviewed your preliminary report, Dean. It's compelling, enough to warrant a deeper look, despite the initial ruling. His words carried a weight, a subtle acknowledgement that this was bigger than just a re-examination. My work was gaining traction, moving beyond the confines of my lab. A small victory, I thought, but the first tremor of something much larger. The very next day, the whispers began. Not direct accusations, but insidious questions, subtly planted. During the weekly departmental briefing, a colleague, a sharp-suited data analyst from the adjacent precinct, casually brought up the novelty of my analytical methods. "Fascinating work, Dean," he'd said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "But these cutting-edge techniques, are they peer-reviewed, validated by independent bodies? Or are we relying on a single investigator's interpretation?" I felt a cold knot tighten in my gut. This wasn't an honest inquiry. It was a deliberate attempt to undermine my credibility, to cast doubt on the very foundation of my findings. All protocols were followed. "The methodology is sound," I retorted, my voice steady despite the prickle of irritation. "The results speak for themselves." The head of the division, sensing the shift, quickly moved the agenda forward. The seed of doubt had been planted. Later that week, the axe fell. An email, terse and impersonal, landed in my inbox. Effective immediately, the forensic research and development budget for Q3 and Q4 has been reallocated due to unforeseen fiscal constraints. All non-essential projects are to be suspended. Non-essential. My entire investigation, reliant on specialized equipment and highly specific reagents, was now deemed non-essential. This wasn't a budget cut, it was a chokehold. The new mass spectrometer I'd ordered, crucial for identifying the unique chemical signature of the actual poison, was now on indefinite hold. My assistant, a sharp young biochemist, looked at me with wide, worried eyes. "Dean, what does this mean for the project?" he asked, lowering his voice. "It means," I replied, staring at the screen, "someone wants us to stop looking." The escalation was swift and brutal. I needed to re-examine a specific sample, a microscopic fiber found on the victim's jacket, which held a peculiar sheen under polarized light. A detail I hadn't fully processed yet, but felt instinctively was important. I headed to the central evidence vault, a labyrinth of steel cages and biometric scanners. The evidence custodian, a gruff but meticulous man, verified my access. I walked down the narrow aisle, past rows of sealed bags and labeled boxes, to the secure locker where the victim's personal effects were stored. My hand trembled slightly as I keyed in the code. The heavy door hissed open. Inside, the locker was empty. My breath caught in my throat. Empty. The small, clear evidence bag containing the jacket, meticulously sealed and tagged, was gone. It was logged in last month. Signed in by you, signed out by nobody. His finger hovered over the screen. The chain of custody is unbroken. It has to be here. We searched. Every shelf, every corner of that locker, then the adjacent ones. Nothing. The custodian swore he hadn't seen it, that no one had accessed that particular locker since I had last placed the item there. The system logs backed him up. It was as if the evidence had simply dematerialized. A key piece, a tangible link to a deeper truth, vanished without a trace. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The discrediting, the funding cut, now the vanishing evidence. This wasn't random bureaucratic interference. This was a coordinated, deliberate campaign. Someone or some group was systematically dismantling my investigation, brick by painstaking brick. They weren't just trying to stop me. They were trying to erase the very existence of the truth I was uncovering. The stakes had been high before, but now they were personal. My career, my reputation, perhaps even my safety, were on the line. I walked out of the central evidence vault into the cool evening air, the city lights blurring around me. My mind raced, trying to find an angle, a countermove. I needed a secure place, a place off the grid where I could think, where I could store anything I found from this point forward, away from prying eyes and digital logs. A place that wouldn't raise suspicion, a place forgotten. Its thick, reinforced concrete walls, the rusted but still formidable vault door, the forgotten network of individual deposit boxes. It had always struck me as an eerie, perfectly preserved relic. Now it presented itself not as a curiosity, but as a potential sanctuary. I pulled out my phone, a sudden, desperate plan forming in my mind. The message had been cryptic, delivered through an untraceable burner phone to another burner I'd acquired after the locker incident. Meet me where secrets are kept but no longer valued. Midnight. The coordinates led me to an abandoned branch bank old safety deposit room. A fitting location, I thought, for a conversation about things that had vanished, things that were never supposed to see the light of day. I pushed through the heavy, grimy glass doors, the faint jingle of a long-dead alarm system echoing in the cavernous lobby. Dust motes danced in the anemic glow of the streetlights filtering through grimy windows. The air was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and forgotten paper. My footsteps crunched on fallen plaster as I navigated through the skeletal remains of cubicles and teller stations. The main vault, a colossal steel behemoth, stood ajar at the back, its immense door like a gaping mouth in the wall. A sliver of light, a pale blue glow, pulsed from within. My hand instinctively went to the compact flashlight on my belt, but I hesitated. This was an invitation, not an infiltration. Still, every instinct screamed caution. The dematerialization of the victim's critical evidence from a secured locker had rattled me more than I cared to admit. It wasn't just incompetence. It was a targeted act, a clean sweep by unseen hands. I'd walked away from that locker room with a cold certainty. I was up against something far larger than a simple murder. I stepped into the vault. The space was smaller than I'd imagined, lined with hundreds of empty safety deposit boxes, each an open wound in the steel. The blue light emanated from a small, battered tablet clutched in the hands of a woman sitting on an overturned crate in the center of the room. She looked up as I entered. Her eyes, though shadowed, held a fierce, weary intelligence. This was the disgraced researcher I'd been trying to locate, the one who'd been quietly removed from the experimental facility months ago. You claimed you had information about the victim, about his death. She nodded, her gaze sweeping over the empty deposit boxes. He wasn't an addict, not in the way they reported. He was a scientist, a meticulous one. Too meticulous for his own good. Her fingers tightened on the tablet. He knew something was wrong with the data, with the project. What project? I pressed, stepping closer, acutely aware of the enclosed space, the potential for a trap. But her posture, slumped and defensive, spoke more of fear than malice. The bioweapon project, she stated, the words hanging heavy in the air. They called it Project Chimera, a pathogen designed for selective targeting. It was supposed to be contained, controlled. But the victim discovered anomalies, contradictions in the efficacy reports, unexpected side effects in the test subjects. The victim's cryptic notes, the unusual toxicology, the perfect staging of an overdose. It wasn't an accident. It was a calculated elimination, designed to discredit him and bury his findings. And you believe he was murdered because of this? Believe? She scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. I know it. I was a part of Project Chimera. I saw the same discrepancies. When I tried to raise concerns, I was dismissed. My research was discredited. They said I had a tendency towards paranoia. The victim came to me, seeking validation, seeking help. The tension in the room was palpable, a live current humming between us. "The consortium behind the facility," she replied, her voice dropping to an even lower register. "They have connections everywhere. High-level government officials, corporate executives. They view this pathogen as the ultimate strategic asset." She held out the tablet. "He gave this to me a week before his death. Encrypted. It contains his findings, the real data, the proof that Chimera is unstable, unpredictable, a loose cannon." I took the tablet, its cold metal a stark contrast to the urgency of her words. "And you kept it all this time?" "I was terrified, Dean. Still am," she admitted, her eyes darting towards the vault entrance. "But after what they did to him, after what they tried to do to me, I couldn't let his work die with him. I knew you were the only one who wouldn't just dismiss it as a conspiracy theory. Your reputation precedes you. This data, it's the key? It's the bomb," she corrected grimly. "It details the true nature of Chimera, its potential for widespread, untraceable contagion. It implicates everyone involved in its development and cover-up. It's why they erased his evidence, why they made his death look like a tragic mistake. And now, by possessing it, we're both targets." A sudden, sharp clang echoed from the bank lobby, a sound too distinct to be the wind. My head snapped towards the vault entrance. The disgraced researcher flinched, her body tensing, eyes wide with alarm. My hand tightened on the tablet, my other gripping the flashlight, though I still hadn't activated it. It suggested deliberate movement, a careful approach. We weren't alone. The disgraced researcher, her face pale, flinched, her body tensing like a coiled spring. "Someone's here," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a thin thread of fear. My hand tightened on the tablet, my fingers white-knuckled around the cold metal casing. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to hide, to confront. But the data, the years of hidden research, the proof of a monstrous bioweapon project, the very key to understanding the victim's death, was still exposed on the screen. Losing it now, after everything, was unthinkable. I glanced at the heavy steel vault door, still ajar, then back at the disgraced researcher. Her eyes were wide, darting towards the sound's origin, a dark hallway leading deeper into the bank's forgotten depths. "Down here," I hissed, pulling her towards the deeper recesses of the vault. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of dust and decaying paper. The steel offered a meager psychological shield, but it was all we had. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate. They echoed, amplified by the bank's high ceilings, drawing closer. Each step was a hammer blow against my ribs. I could feel the disgraced researcher trembling beside me, her fear a palpable presence. This wasn't a random trespasser. This was targeted. They knew we were here, or at least suspected. My mind raced, trying to process the implications. Had our arrival been tracked? Was the network compromised? The footsteps paused. A chilling silence descended, broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the bank's forgotten pipes. Then a low murmur, indistinct but undeniably human. My jaw clenched. We were trapped, exposed. But the data... I risked a quick, furtive glance at the tablet in my hand. The core of the disgraced researcher's encrypted files was loaded, ready. My fingers, guided by muscle memory and an intense focus, moved across the tablet's screen. I had spent countless hours preparing for this, for the moment when all the disparate threads would finally weave together. The disgraced researcher's data was a goldmine of corporate communications, internal project manifests, and highly sensitive schematics. My task was to overlay it with what I had meticulously gathered: the forensic markers from the victim's apartment, the peculiar environmental trace elements I'd found near the river, and the baffling patterns in the obscure satellite imagery I'd managed to acquire. I began constructing the custom algorithm, a complex tapestry of cross-referencing protocols. First, I fed in the precise coordinates of the victim's last known movements, juxtaposing them with the environmental sensor data. There were minute, almost imperceptible spikes in specific heavy metal concentrations, not naturally occurring, but mirroring those found in the bioweapon project's early prototypes. The disgraced researcher had theorized a delivery mechanism, a mist, almost invisible. These environmental markers were its ghost. Next, I brought in the obscure satellite imagery. These weren't the standard commercial feeds. They were specialized high-resolution scans I'd coaxed from a contact, focusing on thermal signatures and unusual atmospheric particulate dispersal over the industrial park where the victim had worked. I'd noted anomalies before, fleeting plumes that didn't match any known industrial process. Now, I fed the algorithm to correlate these anomalies with the timestamps from the disgraced researcher's internal logs, specifically those detailing testing phases for Project Chimera, the bioweapon. My fingers flew, navigating through layers of code and data streams. The screen, even in its dimmed state, flickered with information, lines of text scrolling, graphs forming and dissolving. The algorithm was a digital bloodhound, sniffing out connections. It wasn't just about finding data. It was about recognizing patterns, seeing the ghost in the machine. I layered in the encrypted communications, the ones the disgraced researcher had painstakingly decrypted, showing internal discussions about mitigation strategies and containment protocols, following what they internally termed Phase 0 deployment. The system whirred, processing, cross-referencing. The footsteps outside had retreated slightly, replaced by the faint sound of metallic scraping, as if someone was trying to force a lock further down the hall. Time was running out. I focused, pushing the last parameters into the algorithm. I instructed it to search for direct overlaps, individuals involved in the bioweapon project whose communication patterns coincided with the environmental anomalies, the satellite imagery, and the Phase 0 discussions. A progress bar crawled across the bottom of the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. The disgraced researcher leaned closer, her breath warm on my neck, her eyes fixed on the tablet. The scraping sound intensified. Then it happened. The progress bar vanished. Below it, a title. A photograph. A face I recognized from corporate reports, from news articles. The algorithm had definitively linked the planted evidence, the neurotoxin, and the bioweapon project to a specific high-ranking executive within the corporation. The executive director of strategic operations. The name hit me like a physical blow. A man with immense power, far-reaching influence. Oh my God, the disgraced researcher breathed, her voice a strangled gasp. The metallic scraping echoed again, closer this time, accompanied by a creaking groan of tortured metal. They were breaking in. And now, we had the evidence to expose a monster. The screen flickered, a cascade of data points coalescing into a definitive, irrefutable narrative. Outside, the metallic scraping had intensified. Closer now, a persistent grating sound against metal, accompanied by the muffled thud of a shoulder ramming against a door. They were trying to get in, and they were close. My fingers flew across the keyboard, uploading the compiled report to a secure, prearranged server. The progress bar crawled, agonizingly slow. Every click of the lockpick, every groan of straining metal, felt like a direct assault on my eardrums. I glanced at the small, reinforced door of the vault, the only barrier between me and whoever was trying to force their way inside. It wouldn't hold forever. The upload finished. I ripped the drive from the port, shoving it into my pocket. No time for niceties. I grabbed the pre-configured communicator. Package delivered. Exfil needed now. A gruff voice responded, "On approach. 2 minutes." 2 minutes. The scraping stopped. A heavy silence descended, more menacing than the noise. Then a sharp crack, and the sound of splintering wood from the main entrance hall. They weren't coming for the vault, they were through the front. I moved, not towards the main entrance, but through a forgotten service tunnel I'd scouted days ago. It was dark, claustrophobic, smelling of damp earth and stale concrete. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing rusted pipes and spiderwebs. I heard shouts from above, the heavy tread of boots. They were searching the bank. They knew I was here. I pushed faster, the tunnel a suffocating embrace, my determination a burning ember against the encroaching fear. Emerging into the cool night air through a grimy grate, I saw a black sedan waiting, its engine idling. The driver, a plainclothes officer, gave me a curt nod. I slid into the back, the door clicking shut with a finality that felt like a reprieve. Go, now. The ride was a blur, sirens wailing in the distance. Not for us, but for the commotion we'd left behind. My mind, however, was already racing ahead, rehearsing the words I was about to speak. The tension in the car was a physical entity, a coil wound tight. We pulled up to the secured convention center, a hive of activity. Reporters swarmed the entrance, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. My security detail cleared a path, their faces grim, shielding me from the onslaught. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable hum of curiosity and suspicion. Inside, the main auditorium was packed. Every major news outlet, every digital platform was represented. The lights were blinding as I stepped onto the podium, the hum of the cameras a drone in my ears. I saw the corporate executive, the head of the conglomerate, seated in the front row, a fixed, unsettling smile on his face, flanked by his legal team. His eyes met mine, a flicker of challenge, perhaps even amusement. That smile wouldn't last. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady, amplified by the array of microphones. For months, the public has been led to believe that the tragic death of the victim was an unfortunate, isolated incident, a pharmaceutical overdose. Today, that narrative ends. A ripple went through the crowd. I gestured to the massive screen behind me. My team and I have spent countless hours meticulously re-examining every shred of evidence. We didn't just look for what was there, we looked for what was missing. The screen displayed a complex biological model, a cellular structure rendered in stark detail. The initial forensic analysis was, by design, incomplete. It focused on the obvious. But the true cause of death was far more insidious, a testament to a level of calculated malice that defies comprehension. I brought up the victim's posthumous data, a timeline of physiological markers, subtle shifts that had been dismissed as inconsequential. We identified a unique cellular degradation profile, unlike anything seen in conventional toxicology. This wasn't a drug overdose. This was a targeted biological agent, a bioweapon, engineered to mimic the effects of acute cardiac arrest, leaving virtually no trace unless specifically sought out. A collective gasp swept through the room. The executive's smile faltered, a hairline crack appearing in his composure. To elaborate on the scientific specifics, I continued, I'd like to introduce Dr. Reed, a leading expert in biomolecular forensics. Dr. Reed, a woman of quiet authority, stepped forward. Her voice, calm and precise, sliced through the growing clamor. The agent identified, a synthetic protein compound, was designed for rapid systemic absorption and accelerated cellular necrosis within specific cardiac tissues. Its half-life was engineered to be exceptionally short, ensuring rapid degradation post-mortem, making detection incredibly challenging without advanced spectroscopic analysis and a very specific understanding of its molecular signature. It was, in essence, a ghost in the biological machine. She pointed to a magnified image on the screen. Our analysis reveals a genetic marker, a unique tag, incorporated into the agent's structure. This marker points directly to a classified research project, codenamed Project Chimera, developed under the auspices of the conglomerate's Bioinnovation Division. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping into an unintelligible roar. I raised a hand, commanding silence. Project Chimera, I stated, my voice cutting through the noise, was not about innovation. It was about control. Control over biological systems, weaponized for profit, and as we now know, for murder. I turned my gaze directly to the executive. The victim discovered this project. He was going to expose it. The executive was no longer smiling. A sheen of panic had begun to sweat on his brow. And the individual responsible for authorizing this murder, for silencing the victim to protect this monstrous project, sits among us today. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, a hammer blow. The evidence, compiled from secure server logs, encrypted communications, corroborated by the bioweapon's unique genetic signature, points unequivocally to one person, the conglomerate's chief executive officer. The executive bolted from his seat, a raw cry of outrage tearing from his throat. This is a lie, a fabrication. His security detail moved, but my own team, deployed strategically, were faster. Uniformed officers materialized from the wings, converging on him. "You're making a grave mistake," he roared, struggling against their grasp, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. "The mistake," I said, my voice resonating with finality, was thinking the truth could remain buried. As the officers led him away, the unveiling was complete. "You're making a grave mistake." The executive's roar, raw and desperate, echoed through the cavernous chamber, quickly absorbed by the thick carpet and heavy drapes. My team, a well-oiled machine, had anticipated his move. The uniformed officers, strategically positioned, had him secured before his own security detail could even clear their holsters. The metallic click of restraints was a stark punctuation mark to his frantic struggles. I watched him being led away, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, not at the accusations, but at being caught. The room, moments before buzzing with the tension of the confrontation, now settled into an unsettling silence. A colleague, the lead prosecutor, approached me, a hand resting briefly on my shoulder. That was, "Clean, Dean." "Clean enough," I murmured, my gaze still fixed on the doorway through which the executive had vanished. The battle in that room was over, but the war had just begun. I felt a familiar weariness settle in my bones, a weight that had been accumulating for months, but also a flicker of grim satisfaction. The truth, painstakingly unearthed, had finally seen the light. The fallout was immediate, cataclysmic. By the time I returned to the temporary operations center, the news cycles were already ablaze. Every major network had the story plastered across their screens. Corporate executive arrested in murder conspiracy. The grainy mugshot of the executive, taken just an hour earlier, flashed repeatedly. Analysts, legal experts, and former employees lined up to offer their perspectives, each soundbite adding fuel to the public's outrage. My phone, usually a quiet companion, became a relentless vibrating nuisance. The press liaison was fielding calls, filtering requests. I was ushered into a sterile conference room for a brief, controlled press conference. Under the glare of a dozen television lights, I presented the irrefutable evidence. The meticulously reconstructed timeline, the microscopic trace evidence. The digital forensics that linked the executive directly to the meticulously planned accident. I spoke with a quiet authority, letting the facts speak for themselves. Knowing that every word was being dissected, every nuance scrutinized. The faces in the audience, a sea of flashing cameras and straining reporters, reflected a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a growing sense of vindication. The public reaction was a tidal wave. Social media platforms erupted with calls for justice. The corporation's stock plummeted, their public image shattered beyond repair. Consumer boycotts were organized overnight. Within days, the legal machinery moved with an unprecedented speed. The executive was formally charged, not just with the initial murder, but with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and a host of other offenses that emerged from the subsequent investigations. Other individuals, those who had helped orchestrate the cover-up, began to face their own reckonings. The head of corporate security, who had diligently erased surveillance footage and tampered with initial reports, was apprehended while attempting to board a private jet. A senior legal counsel, whose carefully worded statements had initially deflected suspicion, was placed under house arrest, her professional life in ruins. The internal auditor, who had rubber-stamped falsified financial records, suddenly found himself under intense scrutiny, his career prospects evaporating. The systemic rot I had suspected was now being exposed layer by layer. The space was a relic, a testament to a forgotten era of financial security. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light filtering through the grimy, barred windows. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of stale paper and damp concrete. It was here, amidst the ghosts of forgotten fortunes, that my team had set up a temporary evidence processing station for the more sensitive, high-value items seized from the executive's various properties. I ran a gloved hand over the cold steel of an open deposit box, the silence a welcome reprieve from the media frenzy and the endless calls. The personal toll of this investigation was profound. The sleepless nights, the relentless pursuit of fragments, the constant pressure to not just find the truth, but to prove it beyond any shadow of a doubt against an entity with limitless resources. I had pushed myself to the brink, driven by an unwavering commitment to the victim, to the principle that no death should be dismissed as an accident when foul play lurked beneath. A forensic technician, a younger man with an almost obsessive attention to detail, approached me. "Dean, you'll want to see this." He held a small, encrypted data chip, no bigger than my thumbnail. It was tucked inside a false bottom in one of the executive's personal safety deposit boxes, the one that required a biometric scan and a physical key from an external vault. We just cracked the encryption. I took the chip, my fingers tracing its smooth surface. This was the reveal I had been anticipating, the one that kept me awake at night. The executive was merely a cog, albeit a significant one. The technician plugged it into a secure reader. As the data populated the screen, a series of financial transactions unfurled, cross-referenced with coded project names and anonymous shell corporations. But it wasn't just money. Then, a list. A scroll of names, each linked to a specific incident, a seemingly unrelated accident or sudden illness that had been dismissed by authorities over the past decade. Each name represented a person who had stood in the way of the corporation's expansion or threatened to expose its illicit activities. The names weren't just of low-level whistleblowers. Some were prominent figures. A renegade politician, an investigative journalist, a competing industry leader. The tension in the quiet, dusty room thickened. The full, terrifying scope of the conspiracy unfurled before my eyes. The executive wasn't the head. He was just one of the visible tentacles of a much larger, more insidious creature. The highest echelons of power weren't just reached by this conspiracy, they were part of it, woven into its very fabric. My work, I realized with a fresh surge of determination, was far from over. This was only the beginning of the real fight. A series of financial transactions unfurled across the screen, each line a thread in a tightly woven tapestry of deception. Shell corporations, numbered accounts in distant, obscure nations, and a complex web of payouts that would make a seasoned accountant weep. But it wasn't just the money. The technician, his brow furrowed in concentration, navigated through layers of encrypted files. He clicked on a folder and images materialized. Blueprints for a facility I didn't recognize, schematics for specialized containment units, and then, chillingly, a roster of names. Not just the executives, but others I had seen before, associated with influential industrial groups and even a few political appointments. My breath hitched. The executive had been a significant cog, yes, but this chip revealed the entire machine, the engine, and the drivers. The bioweapon project wasn't just a rogue operation. It was a deeply entrenched enterprise, bankrolled and protected by those who held considerable sway. The sheer audacity of it, hidden in plain sight, left a bitter taste in my mouth. We spent the next several hours in a secure, nondescript government office, dissecting the data, cross-referencing every name, every transaction. The clarity that emerged was both horrifying and immensely satisfying. The initial death, written off as an overdose, was merely a test run, a demonstration of the bioweapon's efficacy and its ability to mimic natural causes. The victim was a disposable asset, sacrificed to prove a concept that would later be weaponized for profit and power. The cold, calculated cruelty of it solidified my resolve. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust and forgotten ambition. The chief of investigation stood beside me, his grim expression mirroring my own. The detective who had initially dismissed the case, now fully on board, was directing a team of uniformed officers. They weren't here to search. They were here to secure. This is where they kept the physical records, the chief explained, gesturing to a massive steel-reinforced vault door that stood slightly ajar. The digital trails were thorough, but they also maintained an analog backup, a contingency. Arrogance, perhaps. I walked into the vault, the heavy door groaning on its hinges. Inside, it was surprisingly clean, lit by a few powerful work lights. On a central table, neatly organized, were binders and ledgers. The technician from the night before was already at work, scanning documents, his device whirring softly. These were the final pieces, the incontrovertible proof that tied the digital conspiracy to tangible physical assets, and more importantly, to the individuals who orchestrated it. As I picked up a ledger, my fingers tracing the elegant handwritten entries, a wave of satisfaction, stark and raw, washed over me. This was it. The names that appeared on the digital chip were meticulously documented here. Their roles, their investments, their complicity laid bare. The bioweapon, its development, its intended targets, all were sketched out with horrifying precision. The tension in the room was palpable, a mixture of anticipation and grim determination. We were closing in, the net tightening around every last architect of this scheme. The arrests came swiftly, a coordinated sweep across the city and beyond. The news reports, initially vague, soon exploded with details of a massive corporate and political scandal. A bioweapon development project halted, and high-profile figures taken into custody. The initial accidental death was reclassified as murder, and the story of its meticulous unraveling became a quiet subplot in the larger narrative of justice. In the weeks that followed, the dismantling of the bioweapon project was confirmed. Its facilities were secured, its research sterilized, its dangerous potential neutralized. The executive, along with his high-echelon collaborators, faced a battery of charges that would ensure they saw the inside of a cell for a very long time. I sat in my office, the city lights a blur outside my window. The initial victim's file, now closed, lay on my desk. I picked it up, feeling the smooth cardstock. Justice had been served, or at least a significant victory had been won. The relentless pursuit, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, they had all culminated in this. There was a sense of profound closure, a quiet satisfaction that settled deep in my bones. But the silence was not entirely peaceful. It was a stark reminder that the forces I contended with were not easily vanquished. They merely retreated, regrouped, and sought new avenues. My gaze drifted to a new folder, placed discreetly on the corner of my desk by a colleague earlier that morning. Its label was simple, unthreatening. Case file. Unidentified. I picked it up. A new set of questions, a fresh puzzle, awaited. The fight, I realized, never truly ended. It simply evolved.